On behalf of Braver Angels and on behalf of the Braver Angels debates team, I'd like to welcome you to this debate on the topic of capitalism and human flourishing. The resolution on the table is resolved: American capitalism promotes human flourishing. Resolved: American capitalism promotes human flourishing. I call this debate to order. And I am looking for a first speech in the affirmative. Mr. Wayne Boatwright. Mr.
Yes,
Boatwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. 4 minutes. Well, I'll start with the very simple phrase, dragons and orchards. I'm not saying it'll make sense to you, but it's a discussion I had with my 17-year-old son. He's a writer for his school newspaper. And he questions this issue about the American system and flourishing within it. And I, as someone who has had immense success within this system, felt the need to try to give him a different viewpoint than his school had taught him. See, he was taught that all billionaires, and I think using billionaires as an example of flourishing in the capitalist system is fine. Yes, I can tell you about my story, but you know, everybody hates those guys. So let's go ahead and face this thing head on. See, my son was trained in a school system, and as a school reporter at his newspaper, that all billionaires are equivalent to dragons. They have a hoard of gold that they've stolen from others. They sit on it. And the only good thing to do is to kill that dragon and disperse that money to everybody. And I was really struggling with how to explain to my son that billionaires are not dragons. For those of you who don't know, we have over 600 billionaires in the United States. But when we talk about human flourishing, most of you probably don't know that over half of those are considered self-made. And when I say self-made, yes, I'm talking about Oprah Winfrey and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. These are all people who have made their wealth during their lifetime from their work and who else they have put into employment to be more efficient. And I realized that for my son, he thought dragons were something that only took. And so what I tried to do is convey to him that actually billionaires are more like somebody who has an orchard. And there's no doubt that that orchard took time to develop. Those trees have to be taken care of. They produce fruit every year, income that is generated from that orchard. And it's a fair question to ask how much of that income should be taxed. It's a fair question to ask, is the orchard too big for these guys to have? But it's not a fair question to assume just because somebody is successful that they're inherently a dragon. And I was trying to explain that to him, how our current system allows for things like antitrust if a company is too big, divide up that orchard. We have progressive taxation to make sure we tax more of the fruit an orchard may generate if somebody's generating too much profit. That concept of an orchard, I think, is a more accurate description of what our capitalist system allows. It allows people to flourish. As a note on this that I think most of you guys won't think about, I was trying to explain counterintuitive principles to my son about other things. Another example was Amazon. Most people think of Amazon as some sort of an intrinsic evil. But what you probably don't know is that Amazon is probably the greenest company in the United States, in the sense that it has reduced global emissions more than any other company that we know of. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the simple fact people don't seem to realize, a gallon of gas produces 20 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere. So when we drive that car, it has a lot more damage than you think. The average American took over 400 shopping trips per year in 2019. There's no doubt that they are taking fewer such trips because of Amazon. And those fewer trips evidence the flourishing that has been advanced by this billionaire who has been rewarded handsomely. But he controls an orchard. He's not a dragon. And Mr. Chair, there's my statement.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this excellent opening speech, Mr. Boatwright. Everybody join me in a round of jazz hands if you appreciated his speech. All right, we will go to some questions for the speaker. Again, just a quick note, when you ask a question of the speaker, ask it directly to me of what the speaker said. So I will call on a first question for the speaker from Mr. Richard Aberdeen. Mr. Aberdeen, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to point out that Amazon has a whole bunch of trucks and cars driving around like crazy.
Mr. Aberdeen, can you make sure to ask this in the form of a question?
Oh, okay. Has the speaker considered that Amazon has a whole bunch of cars and trucks driving around like maniacs, going through red lights and stop trying to get their stuff delivered on time? That Amazon's warehouse workers are consistently complaining that they get hurt from the job, that they're overworked, and they have a huge turnaround of employees. But mainly, I'd like to know if the speaker is aware of nations like Finland and Denmark and Sweden and that, which have successfully merged socialism and capitalism.
Excellent.
Those are capitalist nations, but they've merged socialism, and the people are way better off. They have universal health care, which is a huge benefit we don't have.
Excellent question, Mr. Aberdeen. We will turn to the speaker in just a second. I sense that you may have an interesting speech, and I will smile upon you possibly giving a speech later tonight as well, too. All right, Mr. Boatwright, that was the question. Feel free to address it however you like.
Thank you, Chair. I think facts are very important. They don't lie. And unfortunately, and it has been my observation that many of the billionaires are able to recognize many points that are counterintuitive to what we may assume. As the questioner had asked, there's a lot of Amazon trucks. Absolutely true. But those trucks replace so many trips by car, because most people don't carpool when they used to go shopping. They drive by themselves. They drive around that parking lot trying to find a parking spot. Again, over 400 trips per year on average by the American family. And to believe that an Amazon truck who delivers hundreds of packages per day would somehow outweigh the savings from all of those multitude of drivers, again, solo drivers in cars, putting 20 pounds of CO2 in the atmosphere, every single gallon of gas that they use is just not logical. There's a fact here, and that fact is we're trying to make the world flourish. I do agree that other countries have done a very good job, and they're very safe places to live. And if that's a definition of flourishing, then we're fine. I would ask how many billionaires have come out of Sweden or Norway or Finland. Again, we have over 600 in the United States, a great example of flourishing.
Thank you, Mr. Boatwright. We're going to go to the next question right now. And because just looking at the sheer number of hands raised, it appears we're going to have a very flourishing debate tonight. I'm actually going to reduce us to 2 questions per speech so that we can get as many speeches in as we can. So I'm going to call on the next question for Mia Browning. Mia, can you please unmute yourself and ask a question to me of the speaker?
Should I address you as
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair, okay. Mr. Chair, from the last speech, I would like to reiterate what was said. Capitalism, you can flourish from capitalism and be successful, but are you aware that
Is the speaker aware?
Is the speaker aware that you can only flourish and be successful from capitalism? Only certain people can. Not everyone has that opportunity. Are you aware that that only reaches out to certain people, that there is discrimination in the system?
Thank you, Ms. Browning. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Boatwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you know, a very intractable problem that America faces of equality and how we share prosperity in our nation, no doubt. I am also a firm believer that the way that our capitalist system allows for human flourishing is through what is called a meritocracy. In my personal case, I was raised by a single mother in rent control housing in Van Nuys, California. shared a bedroom with my brother through high school till I moved out. But I was able to go to school. There is no doubt that I'm very grateful for the government to provide me loans and Pell Grants so that I could afford to go to college. But I studied very well, and the meritocratic end of this was that I did so well on the LSAT that I was able to go to Cornell Law School. And yes, I had to borrow a heck of a lot of money to go to Cornell. Best decision I ever made. I worked hard. I borrowed money thanks to the government, and I'm grateful for that help. But I succeeded because I tried. I didn't give up. I didn't blame anybody else or feel sorry for myself. I said, I got to go out there and do what it takes to be successful. And in that sense, I do believe in American flourishing, and I am grateful for the government's help in that process.
And with that, our first speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Boatwright, and thank you to both of our questioners for getting us onto a good start with this debate. We're now going to go to our first speech in the negative. I would like to look for a first speech in the negative. Mr. Glenn Sargent. Mr. Glenn Sargent. Are you here? Great.
I am.
All right. Mr. Sargent, you have 4 minutes. Go ahead and kick us off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Gordon Gekko in the 1987 movie Wall Street summed up his view of capitalism in the Ronald Reagan-fueled 80s by spouting, greed, for the lack of a better term, is good. Mr. Gekko, I feel, for the lack of a gentler word, lied. Greed is recognized in most cultures as inherently bad, and not only bad, but it's at the core of the fallacy of this resolution this evening. Capitalism not only doesn't promote human flourishing, it effectively hinders the life of over 50% of the world's population. The father of capitalism, Adam Smith, he envisioned a capitalistic utopia that was from the beginning designed that way. Smith's design of capitalism did not take into account that the playing fields already in the 1790s were slanted toward the rich and well-connected. Not to mention gender and racial related equality issues that would become so prominent as the Earth's economy expanded. Smith absolutely discounted the inherent wealth and the jealously guarded trappings of the elite in espousing a theory that stated, it's good to want more. And given the right motivation, it'll bring out the best in people. I generally assume that in a laboratory environment where people were also rewarded besides monetarily with love and adulation, that this theory could work. People would get ahead and then realize that their accomplishments were due to inheritance, dumb luck, the sweat of other people, etc. And then they would stop to share their gains with those around them that actually made the progress happen. The real world is much closer to the Lord of the Flies. If the score is totaled in dollars for our society, then giving dollars to others, even if they were instrumental in gaining the wealth, doesn't serve you any advantage. Smith also developed many theories that in today's Six Sigma world would be laughed off as lazy or too narrowly focused. His writings on absolute advantage, which is a key principle of wealth of nations, had only one determinate variable taken into consideration, which was labor. It's far too narrow of a scope to understand the geopolitical advantages that countries have with tariffs, trade agreements, consumerism, and debt, if you take those into account. Ronald Reagan, getting back to Ronald and President Reagan in the 1980s, he was the progenitor of the winners make money ideology that Gekko espoused in the movie Wall Street. He spoke glowingly of an ideal country based on the unproven theory that elitist largest would promote that wealth and living wage through a trickle down to the waiting and starving middle class, much like the water scene from Mad Max. Greed again kept this vision from becoming a reality. So I would ask you to think about the disadvantages of capitalism, class structure being very rigid to break out of, the health of the business taking precedent over the health of the society. And whenever capitalism offers an opportunity, it's given at a reduced rate of the profit received from the person giving that help. I'll wrap it up and turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent first speech in the negative, Mr. Sargent. Much appreciated. Everybody who joined the speech, please give him a round of jazz hands. All right, we are going to go to a couple of questions for the speaker. So I will go ahead and call on a couple of folks on this. I will call first on Kristen, but Kristen, I saw you were also in the list for speeches. Are you hoping to make a speech or ask a question about this last speech? Kristen?
Hi, I was hoping to do both. I have a quick question for the speaker, but then I also have a family story.
Great. So just ask the question now, and I will put you in my queue for speeches once we get past the first four. So ask your question of the speaker to me, please.
Okay, thank you. I would ask this speaker who disagrees with the phrase greed is good. Another word for greed is self-interest. And I would ask the speaker what motivation he would think would be a better motivation to get people to work in an economy, because a society is made up of the social contract. We all work together. If you don't believe self-interest is a good motivation, what would you offer instead?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I appreciate the question. Definitely not espousing a welfare state where there's only a certain amount of people talking. I think the social contract that I would bring about would be something that much more along the lines of everybody has to contribute to what they are able. And if we have a more fair distribution of wealth and people actually getting a living wage to help promote that, then I think we could still incent people to work. Now, disabled people who are functionally challenged in some way where they can't work, I would definitely look for ways to take care of them through a socialist type of program that allows them to live, survive, and as one of our other people were asking about, have medical benefits as well covered for themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's go to a second question from Mr. Ray English. Mr. English, please unmute yourself and ask a question to me of the speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to ask the speaker, first of all, he's done a good job of outlining the disadvantages of capitalism. I wondered if he could talk about any perceived advantages of capitalism.
Excellent question, Mr. Speaker.
I absolutely see advantages of capitalism, much like athletics. People who perform well are rewarded for that performance. I think capitalism is a great igniter or catalyst for an economic system. But I don't believe that in the long run, because of inherited wealth and passed along wealth, speaker before spoke of 600 billionaires and 300 of them were self-made billionaires. That number still pales in comparison to 360 million people in the US. We need to distribute that wealth to those folks where they're not living absolutely below the line. So that would almost be, to your question, of these athletes who are great at what they're doing, becoming coaches or somehow else helping the people who are less gifted than them to expand their abilities.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Sargent, for that excellent opening speech in the negative.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to go to a second speech in the affirmative. I am looking for a second speaker in the affirmative, and I am going to call on Mr. Jay McCall. Jay McCall, are you in the room?
I'm in the room.
Excellent. You have 4
Yes.
minutes.
Well, my take certainly is that free enterprise has the potential to be a powerful force for good. I know we're all aware that capitalism has been attacked by media. It has been associated with cheating and lying, manipulating, taking advantage of society. And yes, there are stories of corporate America's selfishness on Wall Street and in corporate boards. But, you know, for every horror story of selfishness, there are thousands of stories of businesses supporting and enriching their communities, investing in employees through training, education, and making a better place, not only for products and services that can benefit humanity, but recognizing that employees are the most important asset of any business. I grew up in a small town. And for businesses, in fact, was a banker in a small town. But for businesses and their owners to survive, it is was the old adage, and still true today, I would say, I scratch your back, you scratch my back. Businesses naturally look out to participate in small town communities to survive. Coming more into play today in the boardroom and in Wall Street is appreciating all the stakeholders for success. You know, not only to appreciate your employees, appreciate your customers certainly, but the community. And equally to appreciate your suppliers. Not think they're cheating you, but to be decent with them and they're decent with you. Investors, which of course includes banks, not just stock investors. And of course, what has really come into play is an awareness of the environment, how our product or service may impact there. And I think in addition to proponents of capitalism, they're renewing an appreciation of values, sort of our core values in this country, principles and practices that create the social fabric of a business and community. Yet still within the purpose of making a profit. If you make a profit, you're able to serve all your constituents and the community. Short and sweet.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much for that speech, Mr. McCall. We'll now go to up to 2 questions for the speaker. Please raise your Zoom hands if you have a question for this recent speaker. I see Mr. David Newman. Mr. Newman, please unmute yourself, ask your question to me.
My question for the speaker is, it's more of a statement that he is
Can you ask this statement in the
Yes.
form of a question?
Yes. How would the capitalism that he speaks of is small capitalism? He speaks of small towns and local businesses, and that is not what I took to be the object. I was thinking more in terms of the way capitalism is practiced at the present time, which I would call our America's second Gilded Age, in which corporations have free rein to do pretty much anything they want. They have more power than many nations. They can outsource jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a difference As a matter of fact, I'd also say there is a good
Uh,
side. Yeah.
oh, if you can finish on that point, yes.
Okay. All right. Mhm.
Oh,
I wonder how the speaker feels about large and what I would call predatory corporations, which are also capitalism.
thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Speaker.
Correct. I think we're all aware of that. Some things, you mentioned the Gilded Age, and many of the practices from the turn of the last century that the government did come into play to kind of diffuse their power. We are probably at that present time right now to diffuse power. I know business, I guess, basically at the grassroots, and maybe that level is what we need to perpetuate at all levels at this point. It's a sense of humanity, a sense of people, and appreciating individuals, what they contribute and what they gain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's go take a second question from Ms. Sharon Gray. Ms. Gray, would you mind unmuting yourself, asking your question to me?
Yes, Mr. Chair. First, thank you to all the speakers so far. I've appreciated the very interesting and nuanced presentations. My question is, how do we define flourish? And I have an add-on question that a subsequent speaker made me consider, and that is, how does AI impact this whole discussion? Artificial intelligence is huge right now, and it is having an incredible impact on the workforce. And so I wonder how that fits, because the owners of AI, the owners of that capital, are in a very prime position. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. McCall, definition of flourishing and AI, you can answer that however you like.
Flourish becomes individual. I think as long as we provide the opportunities to flourish, which is probably going back to the beginning of the country, of why we've been so successful as a standout on the planet. Now, there are warts, always. There are warts on people, so there are warts on countries and attitudes and concepts. But to flourish certainly is to reach, allowing individuals to reach their full potential. Capitalism does that. It allows for creativity.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. McCall, for giving us an excellent second speech in the affirmative. All right, with that, we are going to go on to our second speech in the negative on this resolution. I am looking for a speech in the negative, and I would like to call on Mr. Ben Smith. Mr. Smith, are you in the room?
Good evening, everyone.
You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I am disagreeing with the resolution that American capitalism promotes human flourishing. I'm going to start this with some rough definitions of capitalism and socialism, keeping in mind that the evolution of capitalism happened over many, many years, and that if socialism is going to come about, it will also be an evolution over many years. Capitalism is characterized by the private ownership of the means of production, meaning that the forces that enable society to produce and reproduce their lives are privately owned by individuals. It's also characterized by market economies, and the goal is to make a profit. Socialism, on the other hand, is not when the government does something, and it's not Sweden, Germany, France, Norway, etc. Socialism is characterized by the means of producing the necessities of life owned by the society, the community, the nation, and not privately. The economy is planned by this community, and the focus of economic activity is on producing according to human needs for clothing, shelter, food, education, and cultural and recreational pursuits. Now, within capitalism, there are contradictions or fatal flaws that lead to misery. These include the anarchy of its production, boom and bust cycles, centralization of capital in fewer and fewer hands, the need for infinite growth on a finite planet, and the political dictatorship by property and capital owners, even in supposedly democratic countries. I'm going to touch on a little bit more on the anarchy of production, just to dive in a bit more, meaning that it doesn't matter about the need or usefulness of something, nor does it matter how harmful something is, only as long as it makes a profit. This is why social media platforms can make their algorithms as flashy and addictive and as attention grabbing as possible. And this is also why Goldman Sachs can ask pharmaceutical companies that they're invested in, that they have a great deal of influence over, whether or not curing patients is a sustainable business model. This also leads to the fact that some people have hundreds of shoes, while many, many millions have none. So just a few statistics about the deep flaws of capitalism that lead to misery. Right now, 1 in 5 people in the world live in multidimensional poverty. That measures poverty not just by income, but also by healthcare and education. In the US, 37 million people, which is 1 out of 10 people are living in poverty. And just to focus on rural Americans and how capitalism has affected them, factory jobs were taken away without any plan for them afterwards or any thought for their life and their communities. And that misery of joblessness led to an opioid crisis because Big Pharma wanted to make money. And those are results of the natural logic within the system of capitalism. And with the COVID crisis going on, the masses of people are suffering. Billionaires as a group have added trillions to their wealth. Corporations are making record profits. Our Congress people are able to trade on the stock market, and they're outperforming the market. And so to wrap up, social democracy is portrayed as a kinder version of capitalism in the global north, but it outsources misery, poverty, and exploitation to the global south. And you can read more about that by Utsa Patnaik and Samir Amin. And with that, I will end. Thank you.
And with that, the speakers thank you for that. And also thank you for timing yourself. I noticed that that alarm clock in the backdrop. So very kind of you, although everybody just be aware that I'm also timing you too. So no pressure on that part, but thank you for overachieving. All right, we will go to 2 questions for the speaker. Let's take a first question from Ms. Karen Fink. Karen, please go ahead and unmute yourself, ask a question to me of the speaker.
Thank you. I appreciated that the speaker provided those definitions of capitalism and socialism at the beginning of his speech. And I was wondering, how does government regulation play into these 2 definitions? So if government steps in to put new regulations on algorithms for social media, is that considered part of capitalism?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for that question. I would say that the deeper, how long do I have to answer a question? About a minute?
Take about a minute, yeah.
Okay. I'd say that about the deeper question is not about government putting regulation on something. It's about who this government, which is simply the community of the nation, who is in control of the government. If it's working people and masses of people who have voices in the government and have representatives in the government, and they decide that they want to put limits on social media, then I would say that's a that would be socialism. Whereas a capitalist country could put regulations on social media, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's socialism, though it might have some connection to it.
And let's take a second question from Mr. Joel Hodroff. Mr. Hodroff, please unmute yourself and ask a question to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if we agree that the Soviet Union, Stalinism isn't communism, the social democracies aren't socialism, what models are you pointing us to, and what are some of your favorite innovations that take us in the right direction?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for that question. I would say that the USSR deserves criticism, but they taught the people of the world a lot about how to make a society. Their literacy rates went through the roof after socialism was implemented. They didn't have another famine after the 1940s. They beat the US to space all the way except to the moon. And there were food production increased, so there were some issues there. We don't have enough time to get into all this, obviously. But I also think that China is providing a number of really important innovations in the development of human society and socialism.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for that second speech in the negative. All right, so we have gotten through our first docket of 4 speeches, and now in the interest of getting as many of the subsequent speeches in as possible, I'm going to reduce our number of questions after each speech to 1 in the interest of getting a diverse array of these things. I have a lot of you on the list, and I expect to add even more of you to this. But in the meantime, join me in one quick round of jazz hands for our first 4 speakers for opening up in a very nuanced and interesting and also kind of spicy way some of the issues at stake. Let's spend the next hour going even deeper into those issues. So, all right, with that, I'd like to call on another speech in the affirmative. I would like to call on a speech in the affirmative. Mr. Adams, Farouz Adams, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to begin by stating that I think many of the criticisms that capitalism comes under, there are a set of different fallacies that are there, right? I think one of the ones that are very integral to criticisms of capitalism is there's this natural fallacy, there's this fallacy that there is a lump sum of money in the world and there's no value creation, and then whoever's richer is taking it away from someone else. That is a fallacy that has always existed. I think in the 200,000 years of Homo sapiens, for the most part, that probably made sense, right? If the hunter that's in the tent next to yours has more meat than yours, perhaps that means less for you and your wife, et cetera, et cetera. But in the past few centuries, with the advent of modern capitalism, that is just no longer the case. And so what happens in a lot of these cases is that you have a subset of people who create a tremendous amount of value. And what we also see is that when you do get rid of these people, right? I mean, so in these much more extreme examples, we don't necessarily have to go to the Soviet Union, but in instances in which there have been pogroms against, say, ethnic minorities, such as the successful Chinese in Indonesia, right, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia, and these places. Same is true of Indians in East Africa as well. The same has happened to Jews in some Middle Eastern Europe, right? And in these places in which you take away people who are have created a lot of value, oftentimes what happens is that the economies in these places collapses, and then eventually after a few generations, they try to invite these people back, but after a few generations, again, there's pogroms. So what's going on here, right? I think there are a few different things. I think that the intuition that some people get rich because of greed, that's a very common one that has existed throughout history. But even then, the problem is that that just does not realize the fact that there's just so much value that is created, right? And so you have all these different problems happen. And so the greed and self-interest that does not go away when you get rid of capitalism. I mean, you can see nomenclatura, and I'm going back to the Soviet Union as an example here, in which case then you had a subset of people who were able to hoard a tremendous amount of wealth and access to resources that other people just weren't able to, the common people just were not able to. So the reason why, like, you will have places like, say, in Scandinavia, in these countries in which is much more harmonious, it really does come down to a culture that is much less like a big country, but in many ways, some of these countries are just like overgrown small communities. And so then that's society. Those are societies in which there's higher social capital, where people have much more interpersonal trust, much more neighborliness. And so these are places in which there's much more sharing of resources that happens, but that is not necessarily because of the capitalism or socialism or whatever else. It definitely is a much bigger cultural difference. And so, but this doesn't mean that I would endorse unregulated capitalism. I don't think necessarily anyone would, but I do err on the side of free markets, because even some attempted alternatives to capitalism, such as import substitution, in which case you don't import from foreign countries and just try to build everything yourself. Things like that just generally do not work quite that well, but integration into global markets has been on the whole much more efficient. So that also raised the issue of America as well. There are some criticisms of capitalism in America, because some people do point out correctly that global capitalism has enriched the global poor, right? I mean, I can point out many anecdotes from Bangladesh, which is where I was born, where 20 years ago, you had children with distended stomachs that were dying from malnourishment, but you just don't see those anymore, because you have people working in factories, they're productive, they're sending their children to school because of global capitalism. But in the US, why is there malaise? Why is there this national malaise? And I think this is the final point that I'm going to end with, is because the even like when you account for transfer payments, right? So welfare payments since the 1970s and 80s, you actually do see wage increases for the bottom sectors of the income distribution. But the reason why you have this sense of malaise is because of breakdown in churches, breakdown in families, and things of that sort, right? And that also distorts especially breakdown in families, that distorts the household income because you have like smaller household sizes, and you get these statistics that purport to show that incomes are decreasing. But I will just essentially leave it at that global capitalism has been great for global flourishing. It has brought up the poor in developed countries. The reasons why you see some malaise is because of breakdown in communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you for that speech, Mr. Adams. Let's go to one question for the speaker. I'll go to Mary Marcella. Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have a question for the last speaker regarding a comment about the flourishing. You know, I really appreciate the statements that were made about the effects of global capitalism on previously poor countries where people were starving. I also appreciate the idea of abundance, because I believe in that abundance mindset as well. So I want to acknowledge that first. But my question is, I think it goes deeper than just the falling apart of maybe families and not going to church, or not having a religion, or things that tie you together. There are bigger things that cause people to not participate in a capitalist culture. There is a certain energy there that a lot of people don't fall into. So my question for the speaker is, how do we explain, maybe on a real causative level, why there are so many homeless people today on our streets? You know, especially like in Portland and so on, where I think people are not housed because it's just not affordable because of the real estate market. I'd love that to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Marcella. Mr. Adams?
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair. The way I would answer that is that it does not really seem to be an issue of redistribution in this case, right? I mean, I think in many ways, there are government policies do come into play here. Government policies that restrict where you can build homes, right, in ways that are much less efficient. Government policies that require that homes have to be a certain size in order to be livable, right? I mean, if that also raises the prices of these homes, and even if you like build houses that were for the affluent, you would also still have down market effects in which houses further down on the chain, their value, I mean, the price for those would decrease as well, right? But at the same time, you see some cities like, say, San Francisco that spend an ungodly amount of money on the homelessness situation. I think something like 500,800,000, I forget what the exact number was. It was less than 1 million as I recall, but it was still in the hundreds of thousands, that order of magnitude. And so it appears that to a large extent, it oftentimes doesn't really come down to the fact that the housing is so expensive in these places, but drug addiction has been a major issue here, untreated mental illness, right? I had a friend who pointed out one time that in the 1960s and 70s, when we did get rid of these places to house folks who had severe mental illnesses, the assumption was that you were going to have pharmaceuticals that would be able to address all sorts of psychiatric problems, right? But that, of course, but the anticipation for that was from some of the things that precipitated us getting rid of these housing options, and but that was all gotten rid of. And so you've had a set of different things that had to happen for this sort of thing to happen. But yes, I would say that the homelessness issue can really be brought down to the issue of housing, because so much money is spent on this, but issues like San Francisco still don't see a resolution. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Adams, for that speech. All right, we're now going to go to another speech in the negative. We're going to go to a speech in the negative. I'd like to call on Cynthia G.H. King. Ms. King, please unmute yourself. You have up to 4 minutes.
Hi, I don't think I'm going to take that long. First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Fairuz. I appreciate that. I am around economists all the time, and very few of them get how much easier it is to have a whole country be cooperative when the whole country goes to exactly the same church. The whole country is the same race. The whole country has the same ancestry and cultures and all those things, and that it's a lot harder to get millions of people to cooperate when they have so much less in common. So yeah, I mean, I totally think it's wonderful that the Scandinavian countries are able to do that, what with them all being white people with the same ancestry who look alike and all belong to the same Lutheran church and eat the same foods. You know, it's really kind of easy to cooperate with people who are just like you. However, I am in the negative, not because I'm not a capitalist, I am, I believe in it, but it says American capitalism, and we're talking about now, not 400 years ago. And I think that our country is running toward a cliff with not being able to flourish. By the way, definition of flourish is not, can you become a billionaire from, you know, and I think that's really great, but that can you grow up in a poor family that ran out of food all the time. And I had to work 13 jobs to get to college, usually 3 of them at a time. There were no loans, there were no grants, there was no help, there was no work study, just delivering phone books and waiting tables and stuff like that to get through college. So I think that flourishing to me means that if someone has a difficult situation when they're very young, in a capitalist society, if it were doing well, it would allow people to move up. And that isn't really so much a problem of capitalism in general, but a problem of capitalism as it's done in America, which is, you know, the rich get richer and the poor can just, you're on your own. So I look at it and say that our country was supposed to have education. To make a quick visit to classic economics. In classic economics, there was an assumption way back at Adam Smith and Ricardo that education was a waste of time, because they literally said that the cost of your education would take up the entire value that the education could provide you. So it was just a zero-sum game. Well, with student loans and education becoming so expensive, not because the education got any better, but because we can't, you know, we can't go to college without the university's buddies getting a few $100 million for, okay, thank you, a few $100 million for another new building every year. But our student loans have become such that young people today can't work 13 jobs a day or 13 jobs to get through college. They have to go into such incredible debt. So I think America can do better with education and healthcare, so your life isn't ruined because you got sick. But
thank you very much for that speech, Madam Speaker. We will go to one question for the speaker. Let us go to Gretchen. Gretchen, do you mind unmuting yourself and asking a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if the previous speaker who defined flourishing as not being able to become a billionaire, but being able to have financial mobility to move from a lower tier to a more secure middle-class affluent tier, let's see. If she knew how that financial mobility in the US compared to other countries, I will even say other developed countries, using somewhat different financial systems.
Madam Speaker.
I don't have the statistics, but it is my understanding that we do worse than other developed countries. That the amount of boost you give to a child in a poor neighborhood with a bad education and bad health care is much less than what occurs in other countries, but I don't have statistics on that.
Thank you very much for all this. All right, let's do jazz hands for our most recent speaker in the negative, and we are now going to go on to our next speaker in the affirmative. I'm looking for a speaker in the affirmative. I believe I had mentioned to Kristen that I was interested in her giving a speech. Kristen, are you still interested in that one?
Yep.
Great. You have up to 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hey, everybody, and welcome and congratulations. And thanks to everybody for being here. I love Braver Angels, and I love that we're all here talking. I have to say that I am a huge fan of capitalism. 2 stories, one about a family, one about a country. My family went from welfare to a millionaire in 1 generation. So my grandmother was on welfare trying to feed her 5 kids. They all had paper routes and struggled and went into the military so that the GI Bill would pay for college. I have 2 uncles who are millionaires. One started his own business, an advertising agency, one became a doctor. And they did that 1 generation. And that is the beauty of capitalism. The other is a country. I had the blessing, the amazing experience of being in East Berlin the week after the wall fell. So I had been working in West Berlin, the wall fell, and I was able to go into East Berlin. And the difference between the capitalist West Berlin and the socialist East Berlin was like watching a movie in color and then going to a movie in black and white. The people were gray, the buildings were gray, the meat was gray, everything was gray, it was awful. And I got to see firsthand what happens in a controlled economy. So why is it that capitalism can produce so much wealth and opportunity so quickly? And socialism, for example, Venezuela, when you go from capitalism to socialism, can go from the 4th largest economy in the world to struggling, poverty, starving. I think in economies, like in parenting, you get more of the behavior you reward. And capitalism allows for that effort and then being paid for your effort. And no, it's not perfect. There are no perfect parents. There is no perfect economy. But what's our best bet here? The trouble with controlled economies, centrally planned economies like East Berlin, like Venezuela, is that there's no benevolent group of people who are going to make perfect decisions about who should get what. The second problem is that everybody has to contribute what they're able to, but they won't get all the benefit from that. People just won't do that. That's like telling your kid that they have to do more work than their brother, but they're going to get paid the same. They'll be resentful and they won't do it. Decision makers about the distribution of resources have to be able to make a million tiny decisions. And the best motivation for what decision is right for you is going to be your self-interest. How hard do you want to work? My 2 uncles who became millionaires worked all the time. It was worth it for them. My father and my other uncle chose not to do that. They chose to spend more time in recreation. My other uncle became a teacher. That was a trade that he wanted to make, and he was able to, because we're in a capitalist society. We're able to choose what is valuable to us. I worry that the existence of differences in outcomes will mean that people that will mean that people don't trust the system. But sometimes people choose those outcomes. If you choose to do drugs, you may end up homeless. If you choose to work all the time in this system, you may not know your kids as well, but you're going to make a ton of money, and that's your choice. So I love the capitalist system. I love having the freedom to decide how hard I want to work and what is important to me. And having seen the evidence of socialism in East Berlin, I feel that way very passionately. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you very much for that speech, Madam Speaker. All right, we will go to 1 question for the speaker. Let's go to a question from Mr. Paul Barnes. Mr. Barnes, please unmute yourself and ask the question of the speaker.
Well, thank you very much for letting me be on. I have a question for the speaker. How would she respond to these facts of 2021? The top 1% of wealthy in this country own 15 times more or possess 15 times more wealth than the bottom 50%, 50% of the United States. These numbers come from 2021. Also,
Yeah,
I'm not quite done.
Let's,
okay, sorry.
yep, hold up. Just read the rest of the statements and then she'll respond to it.
Also, the top 1% possess as much wealth as the middle 60%, 60% of income producers in the United States. And then finally, I'd like to ask, why in Wisconsin can the pulp mills, which were owned by corporations, function well as cooperatives when they're working cooperatively with the drivers and the trucking firms and so forth? But as corporations, they had to declare bankruptcy. Those would be the things I'd like a response to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnes. Madam Speaker, you may respond however you like.
Okay, Mr. Barnes, forgive me.
Respond to me.
Oh, okay. Hello, Mr. Speaker. So I unfortunately have an unstable internet and couldn't hear the second half of the questioner's question. But the first question was, how did I feel about the fact that the top 1% have so much more than all the rest of us? I don't mind. I didn't invent the internet. I didn't invent a heart valve. I haven't invented a new logistics system to get things to people overnight, like the guy that invented Federal Express, like the guy that invented UPS. I'm grateful for people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates who gave us computers in our everyday life. I couldn't have done that. So I'm not resentful of them. My life is infinitely better than my father's life, and his life was infinitely better than his father's life. So even though I don't have as much money as Bill Gates, I'm doing so well. I'm doing great. So why would I be I don't need the same as him. I didn't do the same as him. I probably don't work as much as he does, and I'm okay with that. That's my choice.
With that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much for that, Madam Speaker.
And forgive me for not being able to hear your second question, Paul.
All set. It was I think your response here responded well to the totality of the question as well too. But we will be getting into more speeches and these same sorts of questions in different ways very shortly here now. So with that, I'm going to look for another speech in the negative. I am looking for a speaker in the negative. And actually, I would like to call on Mr. Ethan Abelman. Ethan, please unmute yourself. You have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you are loud and clear.
Okay, sorry, I'll try and be relatively fast here. My opinion, speak relatively fast, so apologies for that. My opinion on this subject, as it has been on many subjects, was informed by a fascinating story I heard on public radio from NPR's Planet Money team in 2015, and I wanted to share it with you. The reporters were following a charity that you may be familiar with called Feeding America. This is a nationwide network of food banks. And I just want to point out that food banks arguably exist because capitalist forces in our economic system leave many people unable to purchase enough food, regardless of how skilled or hardworking they are. It's not always possible. But anyway, Feeding America uses its size to solicit bulk food donations, truckloads, and then distributes them to hundreds of individual food banks. So it's a logistics company, basically. But they were having a problem. A food bank in Alaska never got fresh produce despite high demand there. They got a shipment of pickles instead. And then a food bank in Idaho got a shipment of potatoes, despite the fact that they probably have plenty of potatoes nearby from donors. Put simply, Feeding America could not efficiently respond to the needs of each individual food bank. So they consulted with some economists and they came up with a somewhat counterintuitive but ingenious solution. They used capitalism. They created a marketplace. Basically, instead of HQ deciding where all the donations go, they now post them on an internal website where each food bank can bid on a given truckload of food using a special internal currency. It's eBay for food banks. Now, it's not a free market by any stretch. They needed to heavily regulate it. First of all, this currency, it's not dollars. It's basically fake currency that they distribute periodically to each food bank based on that food bank's needs. Secondly, they make all these auctions blind, so you can't do any sniping or manipulate the market in other ways. But it was still a marketplace, so the system was initially met with lots of trepidation from these socially conscious food bank directors. But they came around to it because it worked. Alaska could now choose to spend extra currency on produce, and Idaho wouldn't bother trying to get potatoes. The new system better served the hungry. My point in sharing this story is that I don't think we should glorify capitalism or socialism or any other economic system. We live in a complex world where we need markets to operate efficiently, and we need governments and regulations to combat the inequities that emerge from these markets and from other forces. My beliefs about economics are nuanced. For example, in my opinion, I think free market forces have dramatically failed in the healthcare sector. Ethically, I believe healthcare should be universally available and affordable. So I want single payer healthcare system in the United States. On the flip side, I think it would be very difficult to effectively combat the climate crisis with a top-down approach to our transition from fossil fuels for various reasons. So when I hear about policy proposals, I try and keep an open mind and not treat my beliefs about capitalism and socialism as a religion. That's exactly what America's food banks did, and they are now better off for it. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you for that interesting speech, Mr. Abelman. All right, we have time for one question for the speaker. Please raise your hand if you have a question for Ethan. Mr. Craig Hutchinson, please unmute yourself, ask a question to me of the speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for you. Do we think, those of us listening in, that American capitalism is strictly capitalist? Or is it a mixed economy?
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, it's completely not capitalism, and the notion that we should be praising the American system as this beacon of free markets is ridiculous. It's socialism. We give handouts to corporations all the time. We pick and choose winners with the tax code. I mean, so let's not pretend that we're in some sort of utopian capitalist system. But that's sort of my point, right? I think it's sort of the wrong question. You know, let's stop with the theory and the reading Karl Marx and whoever and Keynes and Smith and whoever else. Things are complicated. let's you know, look at things on a case-by-case basis. Efficiency matters, combating inequity matters, doing things that are ethical matters, having not a bunch of people be poor matters. Like things all matter. So I just don't think like, and that's why I really said I was in the negative for this resolution, because I just really hate the idea that we would say capitalism is the reason for American flourishing. It's just not. And that's the wrong way to think about it, I think.
Thank you very much for that speech, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the enlightening points you've made. Much appreciated there. As a useless intellectual myself, the chair encourages you all to read Marx and Smith nonetheless, but also perhaps to think of them in pragmatic context as the speaker has suggested. So
fair enough.
All right, let us go to a next speech in the affirmative. I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. Mr. Hodroff, I have you on my list and you're one of the next ones that I plan to call on, but real quick, I wanted to see if Corey Walker is still in this room. Mr. Walker. I will take that as a no, so let's go to a speach from Mr. Hodroff.
I am in a room.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Hodroff, I'll call on you for the next affirmative speech. Corey, this speech will be yours. So you have 4 minutes.
Hey, yeah, so I don't know if I want to need all 4 minutes, but what I'll say is that I do think that capitalism is obviously the best system in the world in terms of like economic growth. We are living in a capitalist country. We are all communicating with devices that were made through capitalism, which is a very cliche thing to say, but it is the truth. I do know a lot of people here have said things like, for example, Sweden and Poland and Sweden, Denmark, Norway, a lot of the Nordic countries are socialist, but they're not. Anyway, those countries are more capitalist than we are. A lot of those countries have actually lower corporate tax rates than we do. I think there's more billionaires per capita in Sweden than there is in the United States. I think they even in Sweden got rid of, inheritance taxes. In a lot of countries that are successful, that have a lot of these, what we would call socialistic, or what many people call socialistic welfare policies, that stuff is actually paid for through consumption taxes. So it's a tax on the poor that's actually paying for those policies like universal health care. The reality is this, like, equality is a thing that's nice in reality, and I think everyone deserves equal opportunity, but not everyone's the same. Some people are harder working, some people are smarter, some people are better looking, some people are luckier. That's just a fact. You can try to create equality, but the reality is that some people just want it more. And for me personally, I think that the world is better off when we allow our smartest, our most hardest working people to flourish. We all actually get the benefits from that. I think all of us probably have used Amazon. All of our lives are probably better because of the fact that Amazon exists and get us goods in like 2 days or something, for example, like that, or the iPhone, right? So for me, I think that we have to understand the fact that we live in a society that exists because of the fact that there are people, individuals who are hardworking, highly driven, brilliant, ambitious, and driven, and they've been able to use that. And obviously, many of those people are born lucky themselves. Maybe they have a few more resources. But the reality is that I think capitalism is the best system if we want to promote growth and excellence and have a strong competitive economy in this country, moving forward in the future. I think the reality is that you can't mandate equality. Not everyone's going to be the same. One last final point I would make about this is that I think that if we want to give everyone an opportunity to be better, then we have to like actually fix those inequities at the root. And the foundation means just fixing education, giving people the opportunity to be the best they possibly can be, but don't try to punish success. That's all I have to say about that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that speech, Mr. Speaker. We will now go to one quick question for the speaker. Jeff Hale, please unmute yourself and ask a question of the speaker to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I appreciate many of the points that the speaker made and agree with many of them, I would pose this question. It's a three-part question. First, does the speaker believe that in a democracy such as ours, in our democracy, that the corporation has a social contract as part of the price of practicing capitalism in our country? Second, if so, what is the nature of that contract? And third, how does then the speaker reconcile the differences between the responsibilities under that contract versus to the stockholders? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hale. Mr. Speaker.
Hey, so Mr. Chair, I think that's a really great question. I do believe that corporations do have a certain social contract to our society in terms of the fact that I think they have a contract to be honest and transparent with what their products are and what they're doing with the society. And I also think that they have a certain social contracts to try to create products that push for the betterment of society. The difficult thing about that is that that's very arbitrary. Like Facebook would say that they're doing great things for society. A lot of people would say that Facebook is terrible for society, right? And there's a lot of people who want to legislate Facebook in negative ways because of that. But I do think that they do have a certain contract to society to try to push society in a better direction when they get big enough to do so. I do believe in fair pay for employees. I do believe in working conditions that are fair and reasonable. I think those things make sense, but that means a lot of different things, a lot of people that I can't obviously not have the time to get into in detail. In terms of that with the shareholders, obviously there's always going to be conflict between that and the shareholders. I do believe, ultimately speaking, that they have a dual loyalty, right? Like they have a social contract to society, but you also have a social contract to your shareholders. I do believe, in my opinion, that the social contract to society does probably like win out. But ultimately speaking, in my opinion, I think that most corporations are going to do what they think is in their own self-interest. I don't know if that's necessarily the worst thing. Okay, there we go.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. And additionally, welcome to Washington. I look forward to grabbing coffee with you in the coming weeks.
I do too.
All right, we are going to go to another speech in the negative. And I believe there is a gentleman by the name of Kirk Jing in this room. Kirk, are you here?
Yes, I should be. And
All
my
right.
headphone works.
I don't know what's about to happen on this. I am looking forward to the best, but you have 4 minutes. Speech in the negative.
Okay, well, I'll start because lack of time. Oh, yes. I guess when I talk about American capitalism, I want to make sure we're talking about not this hypothetical libertarian utopia that doesn't really exist outside the fantasies of the Cato Institute. I'd rather focus on the actual capitalist system that we have in the United States. Just like if I were debating Soviet communism, I wouldn't pull out Karl Marx and be like, this is the ideal communist society. I'd look at what they're actually doing in the Soviet Union. And what I have to say about American capitalism today, and what is our political economy as it stands today, just kind of really sucks right now. I mean, I originally came from a society that really got better every year because I immigrated to the United States. I moved here from a town that did not have paved roads until after I left. They kind of had electricity and plumbing, but they have those now. They got a subway system 10 years ago. They got a high-speed rail 5 years ago. The average income has gone up 50 times. And for the most part, most of us that left are actually probably less successful than the people who stayed because we made the grievous error of moving to the United States, a country that has been deep, deep systematic decline for the last 30 to 40 years. In the last 30 to 40 years, we've seen massive social dislocation, deindustrialization, kind of decline in entrepreneurialism. We have fewer small businesses started every year than we've ever had. We've had loss of work. And what's really funny is that a lot of this has been defended by conservatives. And when you look at what used to make America unique, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about this. It was our churches, our Rotary Club, our civic participation, marriage norms, family, community, faith, all those things. And a lot of people today asked, well, what have conservatives conserved in these past 30 years? And the answer is obviously none of those things, right? They've conserved capital gains for a small portion of society that doesn't really like conservatives. But you go out to places in the middle of this country that used to have jobs and churches and Rotary clubs, and now their only economy is opioids and OnlyFans, which are things a lot of people have made a lot of money from. Whether you think electing Donald Trump was good or bad, something in between, or a fifth answer, it would not have happened unless we were in a country in deep, serious, systematic decline, right? I mean, what do you think about what conservatives would think they would like is, stable work, stable communities. We've seen entire communities kind of gutted by lack of work. I mean, and it started not with rural white people, it really started with urban Black people, right? William Wilson, the Harvard sociologist, wrote I think he wrote when work disappears or something. And it was back in the 1970s, 1980s, the crack epidemic went in after jobs left. People blame the welfare state, but the welfare state came in the 60s, and a lot of the sharpest decline was in the 80s when that had been, and 90s when that had been pretty entrenched. I think we've seen the culmination of the political system just not working really with COVID. I wouldn't blame red or blue. It's not like, every state has been kind of crappy about this. New York's been a disaster. Florida's been a disaster. It's not like, everyone points fingers, but it's really not any one party, the other side. It's just kind of the whole system is not succeeding. I don't even know if it's billionaires. I mean, someone mentioned Sweden, right? About billionaires. Sweden has more billionaires per person than the United States of America. China has almost as many billionaires as the United States at this point. I mean, most billionaires are insane narcissists, but they clearly aren't the cause of our systematic problem. I think it's really the political economy of American capitalism. There's a Princeton study that says that, Congress only cares about the public opinion of the top 15 to 10% of people. I think the Atlantic called them the new American aristocracy, the dream hoarders. It's not just billionaires, but it's journalists, doctors, lawyers, a lot of them people like me, because I'm a lawyer. Someone mentioned dictatorship of capital and property owners, but there's actually a lot of property owners in this country, and it's not just billionaires, right? It's really a lot of us, and probably a huge portion of the people who are politically active in this country, people like us who get our way on everything. And this kind of does really distort the system, right? We have weird woke virtual signaling crap in Congress as working class life degrades for people of all races. We're near dead last in income mobility in the developed world. We're far worse than any of these European countries, or most of them. We all know that our college system is utterly rigged, and somehow we've made it the primary symbol of social mobility, which is declining. And one thing says is that, look, when we talk about capitalism, people mention Sweden and China, we're like
Mr.
they look good.
Over time. Can you wrap up on this point?
Okay, yeah. Well, one last sentence. If people say Sweden and China look great, and then they say, well, they're really capitalist societies too. And if people say that, I'm like, well, why can't we just do what they're doing, right?
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you for this illuminating speech. We will go to one quick question for the speaker. I'm going to call on Andrew Figueredo. Mr. Figueredo, please unmute yourself. Ask your question to me of the speaker.
Great, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question as to the last speaker would be, what exactly the alternative would be for America? I know in the 1930s and the 20s as well, we saw the distributist movement, for example, advocating a return to small property holding. Of course, democratic socialists have their own solutions. So what, Mr. Speaker, would be the way forward from that critique?
Mute. Honestly, I have seen a lot of different approaches, right? Some people talk about, I think a lot of people on all sides of the issue are kind of talking about how to fix this. You kind of have the national conservative types on the right. You've got a lot of DSA people on the left. You've got the reformicons. You've got some of the neoliberals, as they call themselves, and some of their ideas are fine. I think their political strategy is absolutely nuts since it's based on empowering the people in society who have basically ruined everything. But, you know, stuff like YIMBYism sounds good to me.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Mr. Jing, it is always a pleasure to see you speak at these. I look forward to you speaking at many more of them. All right, with that, we are going to go to another speech in the affirmative on the resolution. I am looking for a speaker in the affirmative. And then, yes, Mr. Hodroff, I'm going to call on you for this. So you have up to 4 minutes.
Okay. Number one, capitalism's amazing. It's producing amazing wealth. Number two, it's doing a crap job of distributing it because we're living inside an old, outdated, inherited paradigm of scarcity, win-lose competition over money, and a grow-or-die business imperative. Overnight, we can update this to abundance because it's out there, and I'll show you where. Win-win cooperation and efficiency over growth, because we don't need growth. We're drowning in wealth. What does that mean? Politics and economics have completely confused money and wealth. By the way, use my name, look me up on LinkedIn. I'm not even going to begin to cover this stuff, but get in touch. So number one, food's an abundant renewable resource. Global agribusiness is one of the most powerful industries on the planet and wants more customers. People can't be customers because they don't have money, but we invented money to match buyers and sellers. So that isn't capitalism. That's a broken paradigm that is money-centered rather than people and planet-centered. So how do you monetize all the excess capacity? Because look everywhere. College desks are empty more than they're full. Restaurant tables, entertainment venues. You can't name anything that capitalism doesn't begin to produce. A dozen competing companies jump in and drive down market share, prices, profits, and wages. Wages are how you participate in a piece of the pie. So you can have an ever-expanding pie and the bottom part of the economy getting nowhere. Used to be a single head of household could, and by the way, I'm saying capitalism's got all the tools to solve this, called minimum viable product, disruptive business models. So back to, used to be a single head of household could buy a house, put food on the table, send the kids to college and get a car. Now it takes two working parents. Whoa, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
All right, because my whole Zoom just disappeared. Got a minute and a quarter left. How does free enterprise monetize excess capacity? Look at what the sharing economy did over a decade ago with a fraction of today's technology. It monetized the tiniest bit of excess capacity of solopreneurs. Empty room in someone's house, idle car and driver. Created millions of jobs and billions of dollars of new wealth in just 3 years, building their own technology every step of the way. But what happens the minute you run it through win-lose competition over money, somebody has to take the hit. That's what conservatives are blind to. It isn't win-win. Hotels, motels, and their employees took the hit from Airbnb. Cab drivers, limo drivers, and their companies took the hit from Uber and Lyft. But we didn't lose an ounce of wealth. Everyday technology creates more wealth. Infrastructure creates more wealth. Human skill, knowledge, and creativity creates more wealth. Our ability to use infinite and free, abundant, renewable resources creates more wealth. So the inexplicable, it's all blame. It's not an explanation. It's taking sides in a broken paradigm. And paradigms can shift quickly. The 3,000-year-old paradigm, humans will never fly, ended in 8 seconds and 120 feet at Kitty Hawk. All the technologies available, all the free enterprise tools are available to do this local to global across the world, but you gotta update money, and that's part of economic history. Barter to gold coins based on smelting, to paper currency and checks based on printing, to credit cards and e-commerce based on computers and the internet. And in my last 10 seconds, the internet shows us how protocol can run the show and everybody can get online and do their own thing. I might need 5 extra seconds. You can get on the internet and do e-commerce, charity, or porn. You can get on the internet and be for or against abortion, for or against, you got it. It can be a total free enterprise solution, but we got to break the paradigm of confusing money and wealth. Oh, one very quick last thing. There isn't a rich family alive on the planet that can consume enough food for anyone to go hungry, enough healthcare or education for anyone to go without, or live in a big enough house to make anybody homeless. So blaming the rich is one of the biggest stupid things liberals do, radical socialists do, that keep us stuck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for your energy and for helping remind us of some of the inconsistencies within all of our understandings of these. We will have time for one question for the speaker. I'd like to call on Ms. Ruth Robbins. Ms. Robbins, please unmute yourself. You're still on mute. You're still on mute. Do you still have a question or?
Come on, Ruth, you can
Let's,
do it.
no worries. We'll get back to you at some later point. Let's go to a question from Mr. Rod Paolini. Mr. Paolini.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me ask the question. If not socialism, does the speaker favor social programs such as Medicaid, earned income tax credit, et cetera, to reduce the disparities and dislocation of capitalism?
Okay, number one, I apologize to everybody for the fire hose. Thanks. 4 minutes is tough for everything I've got to share. Look, we've got a gigantic private sector, a gigantic public sector, a gigantic nonprofit sector, a gigantic social impact investing center, and cryptocurrency is not doing a thing because it's just one more scarce token that you speculate in. So it's not about programs. It's not about who's running them. It's about getting out of the idea of exchanging tokens that are, think of a ledger. This will be quick. Ledgers can't crash. Ledgers entries can't be hoarded. There's no political fighting over ledgers. We're introducing a ledger currency, not another token riding a different ledger, crypto on the blockchain. Literally an economy where, well, the closest thing are loyalty rewards where they're issued, redeemed, and taken off the books. They don't circulate, they monetize excess capacity, but they only reward consumer spending. So imagine rewarding community volunteerism, green activity, youth academic performance, wellness activity, and the big disparities closer rewards stay-at-home moms and dads. The stupidest thing that capitalism's never updated is unpaid domestic labor. Well, they go, where are you going to get the money? We kill the question that there's no money for things that need to be done. The money needs to be invented. And that's Buckminster Fuller's quote, you don't change things by fighting the old model, which is what everybody's doing. You build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And just like last point, Mr. Chair, except for the fact that you should link in with me because I've been sitting on pending with you for years. All right, so Buckminster Fuller says you don't change things by fighting the old model. You build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. We don't work on the new model. We blame but there hasn't been a Republican administration to move the dial. There hasn't been a Democratic administration to move the dial because the dial can't be moved by old politics or old economics. But free enterprise lets you be free to invent anything you want. So again, we'll introduce it through minimum viable product and early adopters. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked.
Bless you all.
Mr. Speaker, I want to let you know that as long as you're talking about things going obsolete and stuff, as a millennial, I don't believe I've actually checked my LinkedIn in the last couple of months. And so I will have to make a point specifically to go find you on LinkedIn and respond to your years old requests. Sincere apologies about that. Okay, so with that, let's go to another speech in the negative. I saw a request from Mr. Eli Senish. Mr. Senish, are you here in the room?
Yes, I think so.
All right, you have 4 minutes.
All right, thank you. And I'm really glad I can be heard. Let me know if I'm speaking too quickly. I tend to slur a bit when I'm trying to get through everything and speak quickly. So I actually want to start by going all the way back to the beginning and talking about that really great metaphor of dragons versus orchards, because we're all Americans. And so I get the feeling that there's always these archetypes of American history lurking behind what we're thinking and saying while we say it. And that's specifically that, there's an orchard, there's a farmer, the farmer works on the orchard, the dragon comes and just beats up the farmer and steals the crops. And often in American life, we attribute that dragon to being government. And in fact, this is how things really worked for hundreds of years. There were actual dragons. They started out as being bandits, roaming bandits who would rob gatherers or farmers or shepherds. And then eventually they learned to stay in one place and they started keeping slaves, or quote unquote, owning land, not owning in our modern sense, but acting as god kings or overlords. Essentially, slavery and feudalism evolved as ways in which these people could just steal what the productive farmers and peasants and artisans were actually producing. And that went on for hundreds and thousands of years. And one thing for which we really need to actually credit capitalism is, at least for a while, it brought an end to that. People changed their philosophies, their political beliefs. They decided that kings and nobles and lords did not have any kind of right from God to come to farmers or artisans or workers and take the product of someone else's labor. And so it got to be that after the French Revolution and the American Revolution, instead of having a big dragon come and take away the product of our work in taxes, we instead put in democracy, and you would have taxation with representation. If there was a public good that you need to pay for, you discuss it with other people, you take a vote, and you agree to abide by the results of the vote. And so you actually have a voice in what's going to happen to the product of your work. But there was the one realm in which we kept on having lords of a kind under this new, more democratic system, which is actually the workplace. So each of us wakes up every day, we go into a workplace where by and large, most of us, I can't tell how many people on here are small business owners. I'm not at the moment, sorry, but we go into a workplace and we work for someone else, often very many someone else's at a great abstract remove. So if you work for a major corporation, then maybe the real chain of ownership isn't that your manager who supervises you every day owns the product of your work. Instead, it's the manager's manager is an executive elected by a board of directors, elected by stockholders. And those stockholders, theoretically, by this great chain of, this sort of legally instituted great chain of being that's part of our social contract here in America, they own the product of your work. And what I actually think is worth criticizing about capitalism is, why do we, if we're going to remove the ownership over the product of work far, far away, why do we need so far away that people, so far away that you no longer even know who it is and they don't have any skin in the game of your work? And they could just be anyone, and they even have the incentive to eliminate competition. Then why should they be there at all? Why shouldn't we just own the product of our own work, sell our own product in the market? Everyone just own their workplace together. I think that would be a system more conducive to human flourishing. And was that the alarm?
Yes. Yeah, okay. You're slightly over time. But that sounds like a great place to wrap off. So with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much for this this excellent review of things. So let's go to one question for the speaker. I'd like to call on Mr. Eric Zimmerman. Mr. Zimmerman, please unmute yourself, ask a question to me of the speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious if the speaker would be in favor of having each employee gain a little bit of the ownership of the business each week that the employee works for the business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, so to the question, I think I can save us all some time and just say yes. I think we'd have to work out some kind of exact scheme that gets written into the laws. I will say that most states in the United States don't actually have laws on the books allowing you to incorporate a business that runs under an employee stock ownership plan or a workers' cooperative. That's actually the obstacle to trying out this new model. But yes, we should try that. In fact, even Ronald Reagan recommended it.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you very much for this, this expansive speech in the negative. All right, everybody, we are running up towards the end of the debate tonight, and so we still have 4 more speeches to get through. I am going to therefore have each of these speeches be reduced from 4 minutes down to 2 minutes. I apologize for that. That's mostly my fault for some timing mistakes I made earlier. But I'm going to have the next 4 speakers speak for 2 minutes, not 4 minutes, and then there will not be questions after those speeches. So with that, I'm looking for a speaker in the affirmative, and Julia Mueller. Is Julia Mueller still in the room? Julia?
Hi, Mr. Chair. Yes, I am.
You have 2 minutes.
Great, thanks. I am a chemical engineer and I work in manufacturing. I have worked in China, in India, in Australia, in Mexico, and now in the US. Chemical engineers design factories and we determine the cost of manufacturing and the profit margin. We give this information to the finance team and the CEOs. It is a well-known fact in industry that based on how a country treats their workers and the environment, manufacturing is either cheaper or more expensive. The laws of physics dictate that it's always cheaper to pollute and treat people like crap or treat them badly. This is why multinational companies prefer to sell their goods at full price in the first world and manufacture in the second and third world countries, because the profit margin is huge. The difference in environmental and labor laws undercuts the first world's ability to manufacture most goods. This is why capitalism isn't working in first world countries and the US is in trillions of dollars in debt. But it is working in second and third world countries extremely well, like China and India, because they actually have tariffs to protect against incoming goods, and they continue to allow enormous amounts of pollution and to treat their workers very badly, which keeps the jobs and the product costs low. So the product or the profit of manufacturing is different specifically because the environmental and labor laws are different. No matter how creative, well patented, or hardworking you are, anything you can make in the first world, I can make in the third world cheaper because I can pollute and I can treat people terribly. The only way to fix this is to insist that countries we trade with have equal or better environmental and labor laws. We used to have tariffs up until the 1970s when we started to have this word free trade, which actually meant unregulated trade. We started getting rid of our tariffs, and we also introduced an EPA, which made the cost of manufacturing about 20% more costly. So companies moved the entire plant nut and bolt overseas into the third world country. Yeah. The only way to change it is to change the laws.
Thank you for that speech. Thank you for that, Madam Speaker. And thank you for sharing your personal experience in capitalism for this debate. This is very, very important. So, all right, I am looking for a speaker in the negative on this resolution. I'd like to call on Mr. Dwayne Wilder. Dwayne, are you still in the room?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right, you have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I want to speak as someone very concerned with the climate crisis and capitalism, American style, contributes an outsized contribution to that. American capitalism rests on a dictum that continuous growth is sustainable. That sounds like gradual growth, but if you have 3% growth year over year over year, that's actually exponential growth, not gradual 3% here, 3% there. It's 3% plus the 3% plus the 3%, etc. This is rooted in a neoclassical economics, which also makes the grave mistakes of thinking that the surrounding ecology is an externality from which resources can be extracted freely for approximately the cost of extraction, while polluting the same resources with waste for approximately the cost of transport. At other scales, the capitalist market monetizes and commodifies goods and services such as access to fresh water, pretending that it is simply bringing order to transactions which actually raise the cost of the number by a number of mechanisms, leading to a commodification of the commons and a disordering of the market in favor of largest profit, not public benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The environment is a crucial topic that I was actually somewhat surprised we didn't hear as much earlier, but I'm glad that we got there. So thank you for the speech. All right, I am looking for a final speech in the affirmative, and I'd like to call on Mr. Richard Aberdeen. Mr. Aberdeen, are you still here? Whips, is Richard Aberdeen still in the room?
Yes, yeah.
Great. You have 2 minutes for the final speech in the affirmative, sir.
I don't know how to fix the environment, so I'm not going to go there. I know it's a huge problem, and I agree with you. But there are two things that would significantly help our society, and they're both socialistic in nature. One of them is to have universal health care. Over 5 million Americans every year go bankrupt because they can't afford health care. We have half of our society literally lives in fear of going bankrupt because of their because of healthcare, including me. Even though I'm on Medicare, I'm not sure that's going to cover me 5 or 10 years down the road. So that's a must, in my opinion. And the second one is we need to have not a minimum wage in the United States, but a living wage, a guaranteed living wage. That would not solve all of our problems. It certainly wouldn't solve our environmental problems, but it would solve probably 80 or 90% of our problems if we had a living wage based on a 40-hour week, meaning if you work more, of course, you get more. And if you have a more valuable job, of course, you can get paid more, but you can't get paid less. And to me, that's just moral. That's common morality. And our capitalist society has no common morality. In my opinion, it's about as what you would call antichrist as you could get. It's just plain immoral. Lest any of us forget, it says in the New Testament, the love of money is the root of all evil. And certainly our society has proven that. So, yeah.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. All right, so we are going to go to our final speech in the negative and our final speech for the night. And I was hoping to call on Mr. Anthony Biglin. Anthony Biglin, are you still in this room? Anthony Biglin.
I am here.
All right, closes out. You have 2 minutes.
Well, it seems I get the last word.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so flourishing. I published a book called The Nurture Effect in 2015, and I suggested that what we really should strive for is ensuring the well-being of every person, that we need a society in which every person has the skills, interests, values, and health habits to lead a productive life and caring relationships with other people. I then published a book last year called Rebooting Capitalism, How We Can Forge a Society That Works for Everyone. I described the evolution of capitalism and the evolution of corporate capitalism, and in particular, the evolution of a version of capitalism that is focused on emphasis on the free market in ways that have undermined regulation of capitalism and that have basically just emphasized that if I pursue my own well-being, it will necessarily benefit everyone, which was Adam Smith's notion. I believe that we need a society where where the selection consequences for the practices of corporations are that the corporation cannot do harm to the population. If you go to This View of Life, which is an online magazine, you'll find essays that I have written on the ways in which a number of industries have evolved practices that are harmful to the population. Start with the tobacco industry, and you got 450,000 deaths a year. We need to regulate capitalism in terms of its impact on the well-being of the population. Thank you.
And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thank you for that excellent closing speech.